Welcome back to Speak More Fluently. So have you ever had that feeling where, like loads of English words, but when you put them together, something just feels a little off?
Yeah, I think most learners experience that at some point.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into something that can honestly make a huge difference. It helps your English sound much more natural, more confident. We're talking about those combinations of words, those partnerships that native speakers use constantly, often without even thinking about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And getting a handle on these isn't about learning more complex grammar rules, not really.
No, it's more like tapping into the language's natural rhythm, its flow. And doing that doesn't just make you sound more fluent, it actually helps you understand other people better too.
Absolutely. It really unlocks clearer communication.
Seriously, I think this is like a key piece in the puzzle for real fluency and confidence.
It really is. It's
Yeah.
almost like learning the secret code of everyday English.
Yeah.
Once you start recognizing and using these common pairings, you move beyond just, sticking individual words together. You start speaking in a way that just clicks with native speakers.
Okay. So these word partnerships, as we're calling them, what exactly are they? Is there a proper name for them?
Yeah, the linguistic term is collocations.
Collocations, right.
And it's pretty simple, really. They're just words that really like hanging out together. They frequently appear side by side.
Like best friends?
Kinda. You just sort of expect to see them together. They form a natural unit.
Okay, that makes sense. But maybe, could you give us an example or two? It still feels a bit theoretical.
Sure. Think about when you make a choice.
Yeah.
In English, we naturally say make a decision.
Right.
Now, technically, the words do and decision exist, but saying do a decision, it just sounds wrong.
Yeah, definitely clunky.
It's not strictly ungrammatical, but it's just not the natural common pairing. Or think about coffee.
Okay.
You'd say strong coffee.
Right.
Perfectly normal. But you wouldn't really say powerful coffee. Even though powerful can mean intense, it just feels weird in that specific context.
Okay, I see. So it's less about grammar rules and more about, well, what sounds right, what's idiomatic.
Exactly. It's about the conventional pairings that have become established in the language.
So why should learners, really put effort into learning these collocations? What's the big payoff?
Well, the most obvious one is sounding more natural, more fluent.
Right.
Using the expected word combinations means you avoid those slightly strange or awkward phrases that can make communication feel a bit halting.
Yeah, it makes you sound like you really know the language, not just the words.
Precisely. It signals a deeper, more intuitive grasp. And honestly, it can influence how people perceive you. Speaking naturally often makes you sound more credible, more confident.
That totally makes sense. It's not just about getting your message across, but about connecting smoothly.
Exactly. And it's not just for speaking either. Recognizing these common pairings massively helps your listening comprehension.
Oh, really? How so?
Because these combinations pop up so often, your brain learns to process them as chunks, as single units of meaning.
Ah, okay.
So it speeds things up, makes it easier to follow along, especially in faster conversations. It's like your brain gets a shortcut.
Got it. Like when you read, you don't read letter by letter, you see whole words or phrases.
Exactly the same principle. And here's something else interesting. Learning collocations can actually help you remember vocabulary better.
Tell me more.
When you learn words together in their natural partnerships, like, say, heavy rain, you create stronger links in your memory. It's often easier to recall the whole chunk heavy rain than to remember heavy and rain separately and then figure out if they go together.
That's actually a really good point. You're learning vocabulary and context right from the start.
Right.
And I'd imagine, too, that if you know these common phrases, you feel more certain when you speak, less pausing and thinking.
Oh, absolutely. Confidence is a huge benefit.
Yeah.
When you've internalized these natural pairings, you're much less likely to hesitate or fumble for the right word. It makes your speech flow so much better.
Okay, I'm sold. Collocations are important.
Yeah.
So what are the typical ways these words pair up? What kinds of patterns should we look out for?
Well, they show up in various grammatical forms. A really common one is an adjective plus a noun.
Okay.
Think about heavy traffic. You hear it all the time. Or making a strong argument. These just sound right.
Yeah, they do. It's funny, you don't really question why it's heavy traffic and not, say, dense traffic, even though dense might make sense.
Exactly. It shows that conventional usage often wins out over pure logic. It's just how the language has evolved.
So adjective plus noun. What else?
Then you have verb plus noun pairings. Really common ones like make progress or give advice.
Right.
And the flip side, noun plus verb. Things like birds chirp, or maybe more formally, data suggests. These often describe very typical actions or relationships.
They feel very natural, those ones, almost predictable.
Yeah, they often do. We also see verbs paired with adverbs quite a lot, like fully understand something or deeply regret an action. And finally, another common type is adverb plus adjective, things like highly unlikely or perfectly normal.
Okay, great. That gives us a good map of the different structures. So the big question, how can our listeners actually start finding and, learning these natural word pairs? Where do you look?
There are quite a few good ways, actually. One fantastic tool is an online collocation dictionary.
Oh, like a special dictionary just for these.
Exactly. Something like the Oxford Collocations dictionary is great. You just type in a word, say decision, and it will show you common verbs that go with it, like make, reach, reverse, and common adjectives like big, difficult, final.
Wow, okay. That sounds incredibly useful, like a cheat sheet for sounding natural.
It really is. Another, maybe slightly more advanced method is using corpus tools.
Corpus tools, what are those?
Things like the British National Corpus, or COCA, the Corpus of Contemporary American English. These are massive databases of real language texts, conversations. You can search for a word and see hundreds or thousands of real sentences showing how it's actually used.
Ah, so you see the word in its natural environment?
Precisely. You see which words frequently appear near it. It gives you a very authentic picture of usage.
That sounds powerful, like being a language detective.
It kind of is. Then, of course, many English learning textbooks and websites have lists of high-frequency collocations.
Right, sort of pre-packaged lists of the most useful ones.
Yeah, they often focus on the most common and practical pairings for learners at different levels. It can be a good starting point, a shortcut to the essentials.
Okay, so dictionaries, corpus tools, lists.
But honestly, perhaps the most important thing is just paying attention when you with real English.
You mean like listening to this or watching TV?
Exactly. When you're listening to podcasts, watching shows, reading articles, actively listen and look for phrases that seem to stick together, that sound smooth and natural. Note them down.
So developing an ear for it, basically. Conscious listening and reading.
That's a huge part of it, cultivating that awareness.
Okay, so once we start noticing these collocations, how do we actually, make them stick? What are some good practice strategies?
Right. Noticing is step one, learning is step two. Flashcards can be really effective, but not just for single words. Make word chunk flashcards.
Word chunk flashcards.
Yeah. So on one side, you write the collocation itself, like take a break.
Okay.
On the other side, you write the meaning, maybe a translation if it helps. But crucially, an example sentence using that exact phrase, like, I need to take a break from studying.
Ah, I like that. Context is key.
Absolutely. It connects the phrase to its use. And then, the most vital step, actively use them.
Right. Don't just memorize. Apply.
Yes. Try to put the new collocations into your own sentences. Say them out loud. Write them down. The more you actively retrieve and use them, the better they'll stick.
Practice, practice, practice. Makes sense.
Definitely. Another helpful thing is grouping them. If you're learning English for work, maybe collect collocations related to business, close a deal, meet a deadline, launch a product.
Ah, organizing by topic. That makes it more relevant, easier to apply in specific situations.
Exactly. It gives you targeted language. And, those gap fill exercises you often find in textbooks.
Yeah.
They can actually be quite good for collocations. Filling in the missing word in a common phrase helps reinforce the pairing.
Okay.
And one more tip. Record yourself speaking. Try using some new collocations, then listen back. Maybe compare it to how a native speaker sounds saying similar things. It helps you tune your ear and your pronunciation.
Ooh, that's a brave step, recording yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how that would give direct feedback.
It really can.
Now, are there common mistakes learners tend to make with collocations, things to watch out for?
Yes, definitely a few traps to avoid. A big one is assuming synonyms work interchangeably.
Ah, like our strong coffee versus powerful coffee example.
Exactly. Or you say a big mistake, but you wouldn't usually say a large mistake or a strong mistake, even though those words can mean big. Collocations are often quite fixed.
So you have to learn the specific partnership, not just guess based on meaning.
Right. Another major pitfall is translating directly from your native language. Word pairings that sound natural in your first language often sound very strange or just plain wrong in English.
Yeah, I've definitely been guilty of that one. You have to think in English patterns.
You really do.
Yeah.
And maybe a final point here. Try not to rely on just a handful of collocations you know well. Aim to broaden your repertoire over time to avoid sounding repetitive.
Good advice. Keep learning, keep expanding. So, how can people weave this into their daily routine? Make it a habit.
Lots of small ways. Maybe keep a journal. Try to use 1 or 2 new collocations each day in your writing. It's low pressure, just for you.
That's a nice, simple idea.
If you have a language partner or speak English regularly, make a conscious effort to slip in some new collocations and ask for feedback. Be open to correction.
Yeah, turning conversations into learning opportunities.
Definitely. Also, check out language learning apps. Many now have specific sections or exercises focused on collocations. It can be a fun supplement.
Good tip.
And as we mentioned, reading transcripts of things like English learning podcasts can be great. Read along, highlight the collocations you hear.
So really integrating it into the learning activities you're probably already doing.
Exactly. Be proactive. Look for them everywhere.
And finally, tracking progress. How can learners know if they're actually getting better at using collocations?
Keeping track is really motivating, isn't it?
Yeah, it helps you see the improvement.
Well, that collocation notebook we talked about, that's step 1. Record what you learn with examples.
Okay.
Then schedule regular reviews, maybe once a week. Test yourself on, say, 10 collocations from your list. Active recall.
Makes sense. Keep them fresh.
And the recording idea. Maybe do that monthly. Record yourself talking for a couple of minutes, then listen back specifically for collocations. Are you using them correctly? Are you using new ones?
That provides a really concrete benchmark over time.
It does. It helps you self-assess, honestly.
Okay, this has been super helpful. So to wrap things up, what's the absolute main takeaway you want everyone listening to remember about collocations?
I think the core message is just how vital they are for sounding genuinely natural and fluent in English. They're kind of the glue that holds fluent speech together.
Right. They bridge the gap between just knowing words and actually using the language effectively.
Exactly. They move you beyond just being grammatically correct to sounding truly idiomatic.
So paying attention to them, learning them actively, it improves understanding, boosts confidence, and just gives your English that native-like flow.
That sums it up perfectly. You gain a much deeper, more intuitive command of the language.
That's really encouraging. So for everyone listening, maybe just start small. Pick one thing we talked about, maybe those word chunk flashcards or starting that journal entry habit.
Absolutely. Don't try to learn hundreds overnight. Just start incorporating it consistently. You'll definitely see and hear the difference.
Definitely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Think about the English conversations or texts you encountered today. Did you notice any of these natural word pairings? How might your own communication change as you become more aware of these essential building blocks of the language? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive.